Officers Calloway and Reeves saw a black man behind the wheel and instantly decided he was guilty. They had done it before, harassed, brutalized, and walked away without consequence. But this time, they pulled over the wrong black man, Michael Harris, a former Delta Force commander, along with his pregnant wife, Sarah. What started as routine intimidation spiraled into something far worse. Accusations turned into threats. Control turned into cruelty. And when Sarah tried to intervene, they threw her to the ground, crushing more than just her body. The officers went home that night without a second thought. No suspensions, no investigations, no consequences. But this time, the consequences are coming. Michael Harris is done waiting for justice. He was going to deliver it himself. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The glow of headlights stretched across the quiet highway, cutting through the darkness in long, steady beams. The hum of the engine filled the silence between them. The rhythmic motion of the road, a quiet lullaby. Sarah leaned against the window, her fingers resting against the swell of her stomach, her gaze distant, yet warm. "I've been thinking," she murmured, the quiet intimacy of the night making her voice softer, more thoughtful. "What if we name him Ethan?" Michael glanced at her, one hand steady on the wheel, the other reaching across the console to take hers, her fingers curled around his, warm and familiar. "Ethan," he echoed, testing the name on his tongue. She nodded, watching him closely. "Strong name, isn't it?" His lips curled into a slight smirk, a rare softness breaking the sharp edges of his face. "It is," Sarah smiled, leaning into his touch. "I knew you'd like it." The road stretched ahead, empty and open, the air thick with quiet promises of the future. But then, a flicker of blue and red in the rearview mirror. Michael's eyes shifted instinctively, watching as the patrol car inched closer, its headlights flaring bright. A routine stop, or at least that's what it should have been. Sarah shifted beside him, her grip on his hand tightening just slightly. "Do you think—" she started. But Michael was already slowing the car, guiding it toward the shoulder with practiced ease. The patrol car followed, pulling in behind them. Michael exhaled slowly, his voice low and steady. "It's just a traffic stop." Sarah nodded, but her posture remained rigid, her fingers now twisting in the fabric of her dress. Outside, the officers approached, their footsteps crunching against the gravel. Two of them, one on each side of the car. The first officer, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smirk that seemed carved into his face, stepped forward, bending slightly as he peered through the window. His badge read, "Calloway." "Evening," he drawled, his voice thick with the kind of authority that wasn't meant to reassure, but to establish dominance. Michael nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Evening, officer." The second cop, stockier, with a coiled impatience humming beneath his stance, circled toward Sarah's side. "Reeves." Calloway tilted his head slightly, his smirk widening. "Little late to be out, don't you think?" Michael met his gaze, unshaken. "Didn't realize there was a curfew." Calloway chuckled under his breath, but there was no amusement in it, just something slow and simmering, like he was waiting for an excuse. Reeves tapped his flashlight against the glass of the passenger side window, making Sarah flinch. Michael felt her fingers tighten around his. His jaw flexed, but his voice remained level. "Is there a problem, officer?" Calloway exhaled through his nose, flipping open his notepad. "License and registration." Michael moved carefully, keeping his motions deliberate as he reached into the glove compartment, retrieving the documents and passing them through the window. Calloway took them with lazy disinterest, barely glancing at them before his gaze drifted toward Sarah. His smirk deepened. "That your wife?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Something in Calloway's tone made his fingers tighten slightly against the wheel. Calloway nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward her stomach before turning back to Michael. "Guess congratulations are in order." Michael forced a tight smile, unwilling to give him anything to twist. "Thanks." Calloway hummed, then turned the license over in his hand, eyes scanning it. "Military, huh? Delta Force." He let out a low whistle. "That's supposed to impress me?" Michael exhaled, already tired of this game. "Not unless you're hiring." The joke was light, the tone effortless, something meant to ease the tension. But the moment the words left his mouth, Calloway's smirk vanished, his expression turning ice-cold. A slow, uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Reeves's chuckle was low and sharp. Funny guy. Calloway leaned in just slightly, his fingers tapping against the roof of the car. You think this is a joke? Michael's smirk faded. No, officer, just making conversation. Calloway scoffed, stepping back slightly. But there was a new stiffness to his posture, a barely contained flicker of something dangerous beneath his skin. Then, just as suddenly, his smirk returned. But this time, it was sharper. Step out of the vehicle. Michael remained still. On what grounds? Calloway's smirk didn't waver, but the amusement in his eyes had turned into something colder. On the grounds that I said so. Michael didn't move, didn't blink. Sarah shifted beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael? Reeves tapped the glass again, harder this time. You deaf? Michael exhaled slowly, forcing his muscles to remain loose, his voice calm. We haven't done anything wrong. Calloway's smirk widened. See, that's the thing. It's not about what you did. It's about what I say you did. The words sat between them, thick with unspoken threat. Sarah's grip on his wrist tightened. Michael glanced at her, then back at the officers. He had seen this before. He knew how this went. And in that moment, he realized something. It was never going to matter how he responded. Calloway had already made up his mind. Michael inhaled, then slowly reached for the door handle. Outside, Calloway took a step back, his smirk never faltering, his stance loose, casual, but waiting. Reeves shifted behind him, fingers resting too comfortably near his belt, too close to his holster. Michael stepped out, straightening, feeling the cool night air against his skin. Calloway was sizing him up now, eyes flicking over his stance, searching for any excuse, any hesitation, any sign of resistance. He found none, but it didn't matter. Hands on the car. Michael didn't move. Reeves let out a slow, amused breath. That was an order. Sarah's voice cut through the moment, her tone fragile but pleading. Michael, please, his fists clenched. He had played by the rules, followed every order, de-escalated at every turn. But it had never mattered. And now, standing there beneath the flashing red and blue glow, watching Calloway's smirk twist into something uglier, he knew it never would. He placed his hands on the car. And behind him, Calloway smiled. The evening was just beginning. Michael stood beside the car, his body still, his breathing even. But every muscle in his body was coiled tight beneath the surface. He had been in situations like this before, where men who had never fought a day in their lives enjoyed the feeling of power too much. He had seen this exact posture in corrupt warlords, in rookie soldiers trying too hard to prove themselves, in men who thrived not off of control, but the ability to take it from someone else. Calloway wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for a reaction. Michael wasn't going to give him one. Yet, Calloway stood just a little too close, fingers tapping lazily against his belt. His smirk stretched wide with amusement. He held Michael's license in his hand like it was nothing more than a scrap of paper, barely glancing at it before his lips curled. Delta Force, he muttered, dragging out the words like he was savoring them. You one of those tough guys? Michael exhaled slowly, keeping his tone steady. Something like that. Calloway chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Yeah, I know your type. Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. Reeves, still circling the car like an animal waiting for the kill, tapped his flashlight against the passenger side window again. Louder this time, intentionally sharp. Sarah flinched. Michael's gaze snapped to him instantly, voice firm, cutting through the thick night air. Leave her alone. Reeves turned to him slowly, smirking. That's supposed to be an order? Michael held his stare, his voice like stone. That's my wife. You don't talk to her. You don't touch her. In fact, don't even look at her. Calloway let out an amused whistle, shaking his head. Damn. Protective, huh? He turned toward Sarah, his smirk widening. You feel safe with this guy, sweetheart? Sarah's fingers curled in her lap, but she didn't hesitate. I felt safer before you pulled us over. Reeves chuckled, pacing around the car again. Oh, she got a mouth on her. Sarah glared at him. And you have an ego so fragile it's pathetic. Reeves's smirk vanished. Calloway, sensing the shift, leaned against the car like he had all the time in the world. You know, he mused, glancing at Michael, I can see why you married her. Pretty little thing, but you gotta teach her to know when to keep quiet. Michael inhaled slowly, his hands curled just slightly at his sides, his pulse drumming slow and steady, his mind already cataloging the space between them, the weight shifts, the angles. Sarah, voice edged with controlled fury, snapped, Don't talk about me like I'm not here. Calloway's smile widened. Don't worry, sweetheart. I see you. Michael stepped forward before he could stop himself. Just an inch, just enough to make his point. And I see you, he said, voice dropping low. Calloway's smirk faltered for half a second. Then, slowly, deliberately, it returned. Damn, this one's feisty, he muttered toward Reeves. Reeves, his irritation still simmering from Sarah's words, took the opening, his voice laced with venom. Guess that's what happens when they get taken out of their place. Michael's breath left his body in one long, measured exhale. He saw Sarah stiffen out of the corner of his eye, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her seat. Calloway, sensing an opening, turned back toward Michael, lowering his voice. You keep this up, Graves. You're gonna make me think you've got something to hide. Michael forced himself to relax his fingers, to keep his expression unreadable. He knew what they wanted. They wanted him to snap. He wouldn't, but he wouldn't stay silent either. His voice was steady, calm, each word deliberate. I didn't do anything. My wife didn't do anything. You pulled us over because you could, not because of any law. And now you're trying to provoke me. He let the words settle before adding, That means I already won. Calloway's expression darkened. Reeves's smirk twisted. The kind of look men gave when they were deciding between fight or flight, and knew exactly which one they'd choose. Calloway straightened, nodding slightly. Yeah, I think I've had just about enough of this. He took a step forward, resting a hand on his belt, right near his cuffs. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Michael didn't move. Sarah's voice immediately rose in alarm. What? For what? Calloway didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked onto Michael's, driving under the influence. Michael exhaled sharply through his nose. His patience was thinning. You know that's not true. Calloway's grin stretched wider. Then prove me wrong. Sarah leaned forward, her panic rising. He hasn't been drinking, and you know that. Reeves scoffed, stepping closer, muttering, Damn, you don't shut up, do you? Michael turned his head slightly, locking eyes with him. His voice was ice. Touch her, and I swear to God, you won't make it home tonight. Reeves hesitated. Calloway let out a slow, exaggerated sigh, shaking his head like he was so exhausted by the situation. See? This is why I don't like your type. Always thinking you're the smartest guy in the room. Always thinking you're the toughest guy in the room. Michael's voice was quieter now, colder. I don't think anything. Calloway chuckled. But it was thin, strained. The tension was shifting, slipping out of his control. He didn't like that. His grip tightened on his belt. Last chance. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Michael felt Sarah's eyes on him, pleading, terrified. He could hear her breath hitching, could feel the way her entire body was bracing for what came next. If he fought back, it wouldn't end here. Not tonight. Not with her sitting right there. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. Calloway grinned, stepping in, grabbing his wrist with too much force. The cuffs came down hard over his skin, biting into his flesh, and before he could adjust to the pressure, Calloway yanked his arms roughly behind his back, pulling harder than necessary, just to prove a point. Michael clenched his jaw, swallowing the pain. He heard Sarah let out a sharp breath, heard her shift in her seat as if she wanted to move, to get out, to intervene. But she didn't, not yet. Calloway shoved him forward, pushing him up against the side of the car. Welcome to the real world, hero. he muttered. Michael didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't give them the satisfaction. The night air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on Michael's skin as he knelt on the rough pavement, his muscles coiled, his breath steady but slow. He knew what was happening. He had seen this play out before, in different places, under different circumstances, with different men who wore the same expressions. Calloway and Reeves weren't following the law. They were following a script they had written themselves, one where they decided who was guilty, who was powerless, who was at their mercy. Michael had played along as he could, but there were limits. Calloway pressed a hand on his shoulder, fingers digging in, forcing him down just a little more. "That's better," he murmured, voice smug. "See? You listen. And this doesn't have to be difficult." Michael's jaw tightened, his wrists straining slightly against the cuffs. He felt Sarah's eyes on him, could hear her uneven breathing from the car. The way she was gripping the dashboard so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Michael," she called, her voice laced with warning. Calloway sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "Your wife sure does talk a lot." Michael ignored him, forcing himself to breathe evenly. "You've got what you wanted. You made your point. Let's get this over with." Reeves let out a short laugh, stepping closer. "Oh no, see, I don't think we're quite done here." He crouched slightly, looking Michael in the eye. "We gotta pat you down, make sure you're not hiding anything." Michael didn't flinch, didn't move. "You already have me in cuffs." Reeves grinned. "Yeah, but we like to be thorough." Calloway leaned in slightly, voice lowering to something almost conspiratorial. "Unless you want to make this difficult." Michael exhaled, long and slow. He knew where this was going. But before he could answer, Sarah spoke again, her voice sharp, her fear now fully edged with anger. "You have him in cuffs. He can't do anything. This is harassment, and you know it." Reeves rolled his eyes, his patience thinning. "Lady, I swear, if you don't keep quiet—" Michael cut him off, his voice cold and controlled. "You don't talk to her like that." Reeves tilted his head, something flashing in his expression, something ugly. He glanced at Calloway, smirking. "You hear that? He's real protective." Calloway nodded, playing along. "Yeah, thinks he can tell us how to do our jobs." Reeves hummed, stepping behind Michael, grabbing his shoulders with a grip far rougher than necessary. "Let's fix that attitude." The sudden force made Michael shift his stance instinctively, his body tensing as they yanked him forward, forcing him lower to the ground. His knee scraped against the pavement. But he didn't react. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But Sarah wasn't having it. "Stop! You're hurting him!" Calloway sighed, glancing toward the car like she was nothing more than a nuisance. "You really don't know when to stop talking, do you?" Michael twisted slightly, despite the pressure on his back, his voice sharper now. "Leave her alone." Reeves let out a low chuckle. "See, this is your problem, Graves. Always trying to be the hero." Sarah was out of the car before Michael could stop her, her steps quick and purposeful as she moved toward them. "You can't do this. He hasn't done anything wrong." Reeves turned toward her, exhaling hard, clearly losing patience. "All right, I've had enough of this." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Michael saw red. The reaction was instant. He moved, body twisting, his muscles straining against the hold they had on him, every instinct roaring to break free, to tear them off of her. Calloway shoved him down hard. "Stay down." Michael barely registered it. His focus was on Sarah. She yanked her arm back with force, stumbling slightly before regaining her footing, her breath quick, her eyes blazing with anger and fear. "Get your hands off me!" Reeves lunged for her again, this time going for her other arm, his grip tightening as he yanked her toward him. She fought. She twisted, pushing against him, trying to break free, her voice rising. "Let go of me!" Michael was thrashing now, trying to push up, to get to her, to do something. Then, a sharp electric crackle. Pain erupted through his body. Michael's back arched violently, his muscles seizing as the taser connected, his nerves lighting up in a white-hot explosion of agony. The world blurred. His breath vanished. His body hit the pavement, twitching, spasming, his brain barely able to process the chaos unfolding around him. And then Sarah screamed. Michael forced himself to move, to push past the burning in his limbs, the electricity still firing through his nerves. He lifted his head just in time to see Reeves slam Sarah down onto the pavement. The impact was brutal. Her body twisted, her arms instinctively going around her stomach, her breath coming in a sharp, strangled gasp. And then, silence. Michael didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't feel the lingering pain in his body. All he knew was that she was down. All he knew was that they had done this. The world was a blur of motion, his heartbeat deafening in his ears, his body surging forward despite the hands pressing him down. Calloway moved first, a boot pressed against his back, shoving him against the pavement, a voice, sharp and taunting, cutting through the chaos. "Where do you think you're going?" Michael struggled, gritted his teeth, his entire body straining. Another burst of pain. The taser hit him again, stealing the strength from his limbs, forcing him down as his vision flickered, his chest heaving. And still, his eyes never left her. Sarah, curled on the ground, her breath shallow, her hands gripping her stomach like she was trying to hold something together. Reeves straightened, rolling his shoulders, exhaling hard. She should have stayed in the car. Calloway nodded, adjusting his belt, smirking down at Michael. "Guess that's 2 arrests tonight." Michael barely heard them, barely felt the pressure of their weight. The cuffs cutting into his skin, the pavement scraping his cheek, because something deeper, something darker, had settled inside of him. A quiet, terrible stillness. This wouldn't end here. Not for them, not for him. And as Calloway and Reeves stood above him, laughing, still believing they had won, Michael made a silent promise. They had no idea what they had just done, but they would. Michael felt the weight of his own breath pressing against his ribs, the cold pavement beneath his cheek, an anchor that held him still, even as his body screamed to move. The taser had stolen the strength from his limbs, but not his mind, not the fire burning behind his eyes, not the rage sitting low in his stomach, coiled tight, waiting for release. His muscles twitched as the electricity faded, a slow, agonizing return to awareness. And then he heard her, Sarah, crying, not loud, not sobbing, just a quiet, breathless sound, one that came in short, uneven gasps, like she was trying to breathe through the pain and failing. His chest ached with it, deeper than the bruises already forming, deeper than the cuffs biting into his skin. He forced his head up, his vision swimming before settling on her. Still on the ground, curled in on herself, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. She was shaking. Reeves stood over her, rolling his shoulder like he had done something strenuous, like slamming a woman to the pavement had taken effort. Michael clenched his jaw so tightly his teeth felt like they might crack. Calloway let out a low chuckle, stepping back, his stance loose, relaxed, utterly at ease with what had just happened. "Man," he muttered, shaking his head, "look at you two." He nudged Michael's side with his boot. Not hard, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind him that he could. What happened to all that fight? Michael's fingers twitched against the pavement, his entire body taut, his breath slow and steady through his nose. He didn't respond, not yet. Reeves exhaled, crouching slightly near Sarah, his grin sharp. She's a lot quieter now. Michael's vision blurred with red. Sarah let out a shaky breath, her body shifting slightly, trying to sit up. The moment she moved, Calloway let out a mocking whistle. "Uh-oh. Look alive, Graves. Looks like your lady's trying to get up." Michael's breath hitched, his entire body strained against the cuffs, the muscles in his shoulders burning with the effort, but the weight of Calloway's boot pressing against his back kept him pinned. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Michael," Calloway smirked. "Oh, she's calling for you." Reeves laughed. "Cute." Michael's breathing deepened. He knew this game. He had seen men play it before, in different uniforms, under different flags. They weren't just exerting power. They were enjoying it. He closed his eyes for half a second, forced himself to exhale slowly through his nose, forced the rage to stay where it was, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting. Because now wasn't the time, but it would come. Calloway crouched slightly, dropping his voice. "This what you trained for, soldier boy?" He patted Michael's back like they were old friends, like they were anything but enemies, locked in a war neither had fully acknowledged yet. All that time in the desert, all that discipline, all that fight, just to end up face down in the dirt while your wife cries? Michael opened his eyes, his gaze locked onto Calloway's, slow and deliberate. Something behind them shifting, something so dark and calm that, for the first time that night, Calloway's smirk faltered. Not for long, just a second. A flicker of hesitation. Then, just as quickly, he recovered, exhaling through his nose, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Reeves stepped back, wiping his hands together like he was done, like this was just another routine traffic stop. "All right, let's get him in the car." Michael barely registered, being yanked to his feet. His body moved on instinct, his balance adjusting even as Reeves gave him an unnecessary shove forward, guiding him toward the patrol car. Sarah. He turned his head, searching, his breath catching when he saw her still on the ground, her body trembling, her face pale, but her eyes were locked onto him, desperate, terrified, pleading, and something else. Something broken. He didn't look away, not even as Reeves shoved him against the patrol car, forcing him inside. He let her see him. Let her see that this wasn't over, that it would never be over. She was still watching him as Calloway grabbed her arm, dragging her up roughly, guiding her toward the other squad car. She stumbled slightly, her face contorting in pain, her free hand still clutching her stomach. Michael felt his teeth grind. His breathing was slow, measured, controlled, but barely. She caught his gaze again just before the door slammed shut, and then she was gone. The world outside the patrol car was a blur of flashing lights and dark silhouettes, of distant murmurs and the quiet hum of static from the radio. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears, his hands flexing uselessly against the restraints as the car lurched forward, pulling them away from the scene, pulling them toward whatever came next. Calloway was driving, Reeves in the passenger seat, both of them far too relaxed, too at ease with what had just happened. The radio crackled occasionally, but otherwise the car was quiet, too quiet, until Calloway sighed, shaking his head. "You know," he mused, glancing at Michael through the rearview mirror, "I really don't get guys like you." Michael didn't respond, didn't move. Calloway continued anyway, like he was enjoying the sound of his own voice. "You get out of the service, you get yourself a nice little life, a pretty little wife, and still can't help yourself. Still gotta be the tough guy. Still gotta act like you're in charge." Reeves snorted. "Yeah, how'd that work out for you tonight?" Michael stared out the window, watching the town pass in a blur of streetlights and darkened storefronts. Calloway hummed. "See, that's what I don't get. You're smart, right? Gotta be, to make it through all that training. So you had to know how this was gonna go. You had to know the second you started running your mouth, you were gonna end up in cuffs." Michael finally spoke, his voice low, even. "You were going to do this, no matter what I said." Calloway let out a short laugh, amused. "See? Smart guy." Michael turned his head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes in the mirror. His voice was calm, too calm. "So, why ask questions you already know the answers to?" Calloway's smirk twitched. Reeves chuckled. "Man, you just don't know when to quit." Michael held his gaze a second longer before looking away, not in submission, not in defeat, but because this wasn't the moment. Not yet. The station lights were up ahead now, bright and sterile, illuminating the night with an artificial glow. The car slowed, pulling into the lot, coming to a stop just outside the processing area. Calloway turned slightly in his seat, grinning over his shoulder. "Well, soldier boy," he said, "welcome to your new home." Michael exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing, his body still, his mind already moving forward. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The walls of the holding cell pressed in around Michael, the dim yellow light casting long shadows across the concrete, the air thick with something stale and suffocating. His body ached from the night before, his muscles stiff from the hours spent against the cold bench, his wrists raw from the metal cuffs that had been locked too tight for too long. But none of it mattered, not compared to the way Sarah sat beside him. She was hunched forward slightly, her arms wrapped around herself, her breath coming in slow, uneven pulls. She hadn't spoken in minutes, barely moving, staring blankly at the floor, her fingers curled in her lap, gripping nothing. Michael exhaled slowly, controlling the rage pressing against his ribs, forcing himself to focus on her, not on the officers laughing at the front desk, not on the fact that Reeves had walked past their cell twice already, smirking like he had won something. He shifted closer, his voice low but firm. Sarah. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. His throat tightened. He reached for her hand carefully, as if afraid she might shatter beneath his touch. She let him take it, but her grip was weak, her fingers barely curling around his. That was when he knew. The rage in his chest sharpened into something heavier, something colder, something that settled into his bones like steel. He turned his head toward the bars, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence with a force that made the officers at the front desk glance up. She needs a doctor. No response. He forced himself to stay still, to breathe, to control the way his hands curled into fists against his knees. He tried again, his voice even harder this time, his patience hanging by a thread. She needs a doctor. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, barely paying attention, flipped a page in his paperwork and muttered, "She looks fine." Michael's body went completely still. Every ounce of discipline, every rule he had lived by, everything he had learned about restraint, it all teetered on the edge of collapse. Then his voice came, quiet, steady, and lethal. "You're going to get her a doctor. Now!" Something in his tone made the officer's fingers hesitate on the paper, made the younger one beside him glance up warily. There was a long, heavy pause. Then, finally, a sigh. "I'll call someone." Michael didn't move, didn't react, didn't let even a flicker of relief cross his face. Because this wasn't mercy, this was survival. Minutes passed before a door opened down the hall, and a woman in medical scrubs was led toward the cell. She didn't hesitate, her eyes flicking over Sarah, assessing quickly before turning to the officer beside her. "She needs to be taken to the hospital." The officer frowned. Michael rose to his feet so fast the bench scraped loudly beneath him, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Now." The officer hesitated. Michael held his gaze, unblinking, unyielding. Then, after a slow exhale, the officer turned and muttered something into his radio. A moment later, the keys rattled in the lock, and two more officers stepped in, guiding Sarah toward the exit. She turned her head as they led her away, her eyes locking onto Michael's. "Michael!" "I'll be there," he said, voice steady, voice sure. She nodded. Then she was gone. The door slammed shut. Michael stood in the same spot for a long time, his breath even, his fists loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. The laughter from the front desk started up again, low murmurs of conversation, the occasional chuckle, the sound of a coffee cup setting down. They thought it was over. They thought this was just another night. They had no idea. Time moved strangely after that. Hours blurred together, the weight of waiting pressing in, the fluorescent lights above him flickering, the distant hum of voices, a dull, meaningless sound. He didn't sleep, didn't close his eyes, just sat on the bench, back straight, hands on his knees, waiting. Eventually, someone came. Not Calloway, not Reeves, just another officer. This one younger, looking vaguely uncomfortable as he unlocked the door, stepping back like he didn't want to be too close. "You're free to go. Sign here." Michael stood slowly, rolling his shoulders, feeling the stiffness in his muscles, the ache settling deep into his bones. "Where's my wife?" His voice was level. But it wasn't a question, it was a demand. The officer hesitated, then stepped aside. Hospital released her an hour ago. Michael's pulse pounded. His jaw flexed. What happened? The officer shifted uncomfortably, already turning back toward the hall. Ask her yourself. Michael didn't move at first, just stood there, staring after him, feeling the sharp, quiet tremor of something deep in his chest. Something heavy, something final. Then he walked out. A crisp, early morning breeze hit his skin as he stepped outside. The brightness of the rising sun pressing against the dull ache in his skull. The exhaustion in his limbs. But he barely noticed it, because Sarah was there, standing just a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her posture tense, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. And the moment she saw him, something inside her cracked. Michael moved before she did, his feet closing the space between them, his hands finding hers, his touch careful, steady, grounding. Sarah exhaled a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around his, her body trembling slightly. She looked up at him, her lips parting, her voice breaking before she could even speak. Then, barely a whisper, "He's gone." Michael felt his entire body go still. Sarah swallowed hard, her fingers clenching around his. The baby. Michael didn't breathe, didn't blink. Sarah's voice shook. "Ethan," she inhaled sharply, her breath catching in her throat. "He's gone." Michael stared at her, his mind refusing to register the words, his body locked in place, frozen in a moment that shouldn't exist, that shouldn't be real, that shouldn't have happened. Something inside him cracked open, slow and terrible, the kind of break that couldn't be stitched back together, the kind that didn't heal. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. She had cried all she could. Now, there was only emptiness. Michael felt his jaw tighten, his breath slow, controlled, deliberate. Sarah shook her head slightly, her grip on him tightening, her body swaying just slightly, unsteady. And finally, Michael moved. He pulled her in, wrapping his arms around her, holding her against his chest as she trembled, as the weight of everything pressed down on them both. His fingers curled against the fabric of her shirt, his jaw pressing against the top of her head as he exhaled slow, controlled, feeling her heartbeat against his. He didn't say anything, because what words could exist for something like this? They stood there, unmoving, the world continuing around them as if nothing had changed, as if everything they had built, everything they had dreamed, hadn't been torn apart in a single night. Michael's fingers curled slightly, tightening his hold just a little more. There was no anger yet, no fury. Not yet. Right now, there was only this: the grief, the loss, the unbearable silence of a future stolen before it had a chance to begin. Right now, there was only Sarah, shaking in his arms, and the quiet, empty space where their son was supposed to be. The house felt different. It wasn't just the quiet, the kind that settled too deep, too thick, pressing into the walls like something permanent. It wasn't even the dim light filtering through the closed curtains, casting long, muted shadows across the furniture. It was something else. Something wrong. Michael stood in the doorway, his fingers still curled around the handle, his breath slow and even, his pulse a steady drum in his ears. He had walked through this door 100 times before, had memorized the creak in the floorboards, the way the air smelled faintly of the coffee Sarah made every morning, the subtle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But now, every detail felt distant, like a memory that no longer belonged to him. Sarah moved past him, her steps slow, almost hesitant, as if she, too, was stepping into a place that no longer felt like home. She didn't take off her shoes, didn't turn on the lights, didn't move toward the couch or the kitchen or the bedroom. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, her gaze fixed on nothing, lost somewhere he couldn't reach. Michael let the door close behind him, the soft click echoing too loud in the silence. His voice was careful, low. "What did the doctors say?" Sarah inhaled sharply, just once, like she was trying to brace herself, but she didn't answer right away. Michael took a step closer, keeping his tone steady. "Sarah," she blinked, her shoulders stiffening, as if she had forgotten he was there. Slowly, she exhaled, her voice quiet, hollow. They said. She hesitated, her fingers curling against her sleeves. There was nothing they could do. Michael felt something tighten in his chest, sharp and unforgiving. Was it? He swallowed, forcing the words out. Was it from the fall? Sarah nodded, barely, her eyes still unfocused. They said the impact was too much, too sudden. Another breath, unsteady, fragile. I already knew before they told me. Her fingers curled tighter against her arms, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt it. Michael's jaw tensed, his fists clenched at his sides before he forced himself to relax, to breathe, to stay still. His mind flashed back to the moment it had happened. The way she had gasped, the way her body had curled instinctively, the way she had tried to hold something together that had already begun slipping away. His voice was quiet. Did they treat you? Sarah nodded again, slower this time. They ran tests, did an ultrasound. Her breath hitched slightly. There was no heartbeat. Michael felt the words hit somewhere deep, somewhere that hadn't caught up with the rest of him yet. No heartbeat. He closed his eyes for a brief second, just long enough to press the weight of the words into his ribs, into his bones, into the quiet, seething storm building beneath his skin. Sarah let out a shaky breath. They gave me something to help with the pain. Her arms tightened around herself again. Not that it really matters. Michael opened his eyes. He didn't move toward her yet, didn't reach for her, because he knew that if he touched her now, if he pulled her in, if he let himself feel the full weight of what had been taken from them, the grief would be too much, too consuming, too deep to crawl out of. And one of them had to hold on, even if it was only for a little while. He exhaled slowly. Did they say anything else? Sarah shook her head. They told me to rest, to come back if there were complications. A hollow laugh, barely there, like I'd want to go back. Michael's jaw flexed. He knew exactly what she meant. She lifted a hand to her face, pressing the heel of her palm against her temple, her breath uneven again. I keep thinking, her voice faltered, cracking at the edges. I keep thinking about how I was holding him, like that was going to protect him. Michael's stomach twisted. Sarah shook her head, her eyes wet, but the tears didn't fall. I couldn't save him. Michael stepped forward before she could say anything else, closing the space between them, his hands moving to her arms, pulling her in gently but firmly, holding her close, feeling her body tremble against his. His voice was quiet but steady. Neither could I. She inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt, her body pressing into his as if she could fold herself into him, disappear into something safe, something solid. He held her tighter, pressing his lips against the top of her head, closing his eyes as she let out a single, shuddering breath, her hands fisting against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, neither of them moving, neither of them speaking, the silence stretching between them, heavy and suffocating. Michael felt every inch of it settle into his bones, every second, every heartbeat that no longer existed. Sarah shifted slightly, her breath evening out, but she didn't pull away. Her voice was quiet, barely there. I don't know what to do. Michael opened his eyes, staring at the darkened room, at the pieces of their life that still sat untouched, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. He exhaled slowly, pressing his chin against her hair, his arms still wrapped tightly around her. I don't either. And for the first time since that night had begun, he let himself feel it, the loss, the grief, the unbearable weight of a future stolen before it had even begun, the quiet ache of what would never be, the sound of Sarah's breath against his chest, and the crushing weight of a silence that neither of them knew how to fill. Michael sat in the dim light of the living room, his hands resting against his knees, fingers curled loosely, his gaze fixed on nothing. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as Sarah moved in the bedroom, the sound too soft, too slow. It was past midnight now, but neither of them had slept. He had tried. For her, for whatever remained of the life they had before. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her on the ground, curled in pain, her breath sharp and ragged, her arms wrapped protectively around the son they would never get to meet. He saw the way Calloway had laughed, the way Reeves had smirked, the way they had stood over them as if they were nothing, as if what they had done would never matter, as if there would be no consequences. Michael inhaled slowly through his nose, steady, measured, the only sign of what was building inside him, the way his fingers pressed into his knees, knuckles going white. The grief was still there, heavy and unbearable, sitting in his chest like something that could never be moved. But beneath it, something else was growing, something deeper, something colder. He had spent his entire life learning control, training for it, perfecting it. He had walked through fire, through war, through battles that should have left him dead, and he had always known how to keep himself in check, how to stay sharp, how to calculate every move before he made it. But this wasn't war. This wasn't a battlefield. This was home, and they had brought the war to him. His jaw clenched, his breath slow and deliberate as he pushed himself to his feet, his body feeling too heavy, too restrained. His gaze flicked toward the hallway, toward the closed bedroom door where Sarah was still awake, lying on her side, staring at the wall, breathing too quietly. She hadn't spoken much after they came home, had barely touched the food he made, hadn't turned on the television, hadn't reached for him again, hadn't done anything except exist in a space that no longer felt like hers. Michael exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly, his jaw tightening further. He had been patient. He had let the process play out, had followed the rules, had let himself believe, if only for a moment, that the world they lived in was still one where justice existed, that if he gave it time, someone would be held accountable, someone would pay, but they wouldn't. And he had known it from the moment they locked him in that cell, from the moment he heard them laughing, from the second Calloway had looked him in the eyes and smirked, because he knew they had done this, and they would get away with it, unless... Michael's hands flexed at his sides. He swallowed, forcing himself to exhale slowly, grounding himself in the moment, forcing his mind to stay clear, to focus, to push away the instinct to move now before he had fully decided how far he was willing to go. A sound broke through the silence, the quiet shuffle of movement behind him. He turned his head slightly. Sarah stood in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, her arms clutching it close, her eyes shadowed, her posture small, fragile. He straightened instinctively, his expression smoothing out, the sharp edges of his thoughts carefully pushed back beneath the surface. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him, and for a moment he thought she might ask what he was thinking, might see the way his stance had shifted, the way his shoulders had squared, the way his entire body had begun bracing for something she wasn't ready to face. But she didn't. Her voice was quiet. "You're angry." Michael inhaled slowly, watching her, his fingers flexing again before he forced them to still. He nodded once. Yes. Sarah studied him, her expression unreadable, her grip on the blanket tightening. "I've never seen you like this before." Michael held her gaze, steady, unwavering. "I've never felt like this before." She swallowed, her breath unsteady, her voice softer now. "I don't know what to do with it." Michael exhaled, his jaw flexing slightly. "You don't have to do anything." Sarah let out a breath that almost sounded like a broken laugh. "How can you say that?" She shook her head, her eyes shining with something raw. "I can't just sit here. I can't just exist like this, knowing they're still out there, knowing they get to go home and sleep and—" She cut herself off, her voice catching. Michael stepped forward before he could think twice about it, his hands moving to her arms, grounding her, holding her steady. She didn't pull away, but she trembled beneath his touch. He kept his voice low. "I know." She exhaled sharply, blinking rapidly, shaking her head again, her breath uneven. "Then what are we supposed to do?" Michael didn't answer right away, because he wasn't sure she was ready for the truth. Not yet. His grip on her arms tightened slightly, his voice steady. unshaken. Right now, we grieve. Sarah swallowed, her gaze flicking away, her fingers tightening in the fabric of the blanket, and for a long moment, she just stood there, breathing, struggling, trying to hold herself together. Then, finally, she nodded. Michael released her arms, his fingers lingering just slightly before dropping to his sides. Sarah stepped back, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come to bed?" Michael's jaw flexed, his hands clenching once before relaxing. He nodded once. She turned slowly, disappearing down the hall, her footsteps soft against the floor, the bedroom door creaking slightly as she pushed it open. Michael didn't move right away, didn't follow, just stood in the dim light of the living room, his breath even, controlled, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle deep into his ribs. Sarah had always been the one to keep him steady, to remind him who he was, to pull him back when the world had threatened to take too much. But now, there was no steadying this, no pulling back, no stopping what had already begun. Michael inhaled deeply, exhaled slow, closing his eyes for just a moment before turning, following the path Sarah had taken, pushing the thoughts back down, burying them beneath the grief, because for now, she needed him here. For now, she needed his anger to stay where it was. For now, but not forever, never forever. Calloway and Reeves had taken everything from him, and the world had let them do it. No one was coming for them. No one was going to knock on their doors and drag them away in cuffs. No judge was going to read their charges. No courtroom was going to hold them accountable. No system was going to weigh their sins and decide they didn't deserve to walk free, because this world didn't punish men like them. But he could. Michael exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing against his thighs, his mind already clearing, his focus sharpening, his grief turning into something else, something colder. He had spent his life following orders. He had learned control, discipline, restraint. He had spent years carrying out missions, ensuring that the world remained in balance, eliminating threats before they had the chance to grow. Now, it was time to take that knowledge and apply it to something personal, because this was a war now, and he knew exactly how to fight a war. His movements were deliberate as he stepped away from the window, retrieving his phone from the table, his mind already working through the steps, the process, the strategy. He couldn't act yet, not without knowing everything, not without having the advantage. First, he had to find them. He pulled up the county records, his fingers steady as he navigated through the system, scanning through the names, filtering through the information. Every officer's residence was public record. If you knew where to look, if you knew how to move through databases, if you understood how systems were built, then nothing was truly hidden. It didn't take long. Calloway's name appeared first. A 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of town, just past the old industrial district. A cul-de-sac, wide driveways, neatly trimmed lawns. He lived alone. No wife, no kids, just him. Reeves was different. A rental house near the highway, close enough to the department to make his commute easy. A place that looked like it had been chosen out of convenience rather than comfort. He had a fiancée, a woman whose name meant nothing to Michael, someone who had no idea what kind of man she was living with. Michael's jaw flexed as he memorized the addresses, storing the information away in his mind. Knowing where they lived wasn't enough. He needed to watch, to learn their routines, to understand when they were vulnerable, when they were alone, when no one would come looking. He needed certainty. Michael turned off the phone, setting it back down, his breath slow, controlled, his movements precise as he grabbed his jacket from the chair. He pulled it on, feeling the weight settle over his shoulders, feeling the steadiness return to his hands. He didn't hesitate as he moved toward the door, stepping into the night, locking it behind him, his steps silent as he made his way to the truck. The air was cold, but he barely noticed it, his mind already ahead of his body, already processing the steps that would come next, the actions he would take, the nights he would spend waiting for the right moment. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger was reckless. Anger clouded judgment. This wasn't about rage. This was about justice. The kind that couldn't be given in a courtroom. The kind that couldn't be bargained or appealed. The kind that didn't care about rank or badge or power. The kind of justice that came for men in the dark when they least expected it. Michael started the truck, the engine humming low beneath the quiet of the night. He pulled out of the driveway, merging onto the road, his eyes steady, his pulse even. The war had begun, and the first battle was information. It didn't take long to find Calloway's house. Michael parked a few streets away, slipping into the shadows, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of training. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people locked their doors, but never truly worried about what lurked outside. He moved carefully, keeping to the edges, scanning the property, memorizing the layout. A single car in the driveway, the house dark except for a faint glow coming from an upstairs window. Calloway was home, alone. Michael exhaled slowly, settling into the darkness, his body still, his mind calculating. He would watch, he would wait, because men like Calloway always thought they were untouchable, and that was their first mistake. Reeves was next. Michael tracked his house the same way, parking near an abandoned lot, moving through the shadows, studying every detail. The lights were on inside, movement visible through the windows. His fiancée was home, laughing at something on the television, oblivious to the kind of man she had chosen. Michael watched for a long time. Reeves came home late, his body language loose, relaxed, his routine careless. He wasn't worried. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He had no reason to believe that anything in his world had changed. Michael exhaled slowly, watching him step inside, the door closing behind him, locking out the night, for now. Michael turned, disappearing into the dark, his steps silent, his mind already cataloging everything, already preparing for what came next. Because soon, very soon, both Calloway and Reeves would learn what it felt like to be hunted. Michael moved through the house in silence, the dim glow from the kitchen the only source of light as he gathered what he needed, his motions slow, methodical, deliberate. Every movement had purpose. Every breath was controlled. His mind had settled into something sharp, something honed, something unshakable. The past few nights had been spent watching, studying, learning. He had tracked their routines, memorized the way Calloway came home late, alone,